You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today is a man who let's just say doesn't back down from a fight. And if you are in a fight, especially in a courtroom, then Mr. James Bopp is who you want representing you. I could go through all the states in which he is admitted to practice law and all the awards that he's won and all the cases that he prevailed in, but that would take the entire podcast. So I will just say, Mr. Bopp, it's great to see you.
Well, thank you. And it's really good to see you. I've enjoyed working with you over the years, and I have been very blessed in my practice and have had wonderful associates, people that can practice at the top of the profession, who are top law students in law schools all over the country. And, that's what you need to be successful.
You were born in Terre Haute.
And my law firm is still there. In Terre Haute.
I was just getting ready to say, and you have stayed true to Terre Haute. What was Terre Haute? Go ahead.
I did sneak off the University of Florida Law School and then came back.
Why? I got several kind of questions here about your background, so let me get through them real fast. Why? You went to IU. When did you graduate from IU?
1970.
And so you were there when Mark Spitz was there?
No.
You missed him?
I missed him.
But you were there when George McGinnis was there.
Yes, for the 1 year that he played at IU, and I remember watching him in the old field house. So, yeah.
What made you choose IU as a young kid?
My dad went to IU. He went to IU Med School, and he was a big IU fan. And I can remember watching Indiana, Michigan in 1963 on a black and white TV, where if they won the game, they won the Big Ten championship. And of course, that was the John McLaughlin and the Van Arsdale twins.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Cassie Russell of Michigan. We were ahead by 10 with a minute to go and lost the game. It was really tragic.
Van Arsdale, the Manual High School IPS kids?
You bet. And but I have so it was just natural that in terms of my thinking, to want to go to IU. It offered everything I was interested in. I didn't apply to any other school and just luckily got selected.
The Indiana University undergrad, and I think your undergrad was history and political science. Is that right?
It was.
That was my undergrad through IU, history and political science. And it's a great double major because they complement each other in so many ways. But
I was trying to take a degree that would teach me how to write, because I knew after second semester organic chemistry. See, I first thought I'd be a doctor like my dad, my grandfather, and my uncle, all in Terre Haute. But second semester organic chemistry convinced me to be a lawyer. And so thinking about law school, I wanted to learn how to write. And so those two majors, they're certainly pertinent to being a lawyer, in my opinion, but the main skill set was learning how to write.
So when you've cross-examined doctors, did they know that you didn't have what it takes to be a doctor? Did they throw that in your face?
I try not to admit that, but I have deposed a few doctors in my time.
But University of Florida for law school, they had a heck of a football team in the early 70s, but what made you choose that school?
I had some friends that were down there, but the main reason I was accepted to both IU law schools, but I was really active in college. I was a student senator. I was president of the student senate. I ran and lost for president of the student body. I was involved in conservative politics, and my mentor was Stan Evans, who was the editorial writer for the Indianapolis News, just a wonderful mentor. And I just felt like for the first time, I was really going to have to study, and I needed to be somewhere where wasn't going to be pulled into things, where I
Right.
was anonymous, and I was certainly anonymous, 100%. There was one other Hoosier of the 300 that started at the University of Florida when I did. There's one other Hoosier, but who I've completely lost track of. But so I was, and thankfully I was because I really did have to study.
We have mentioned IU quite a few times in the first few minutes because Mr. Bopp has been named a trustee of Indiana University by Governor Mike Braun. How long have you known Governor Braun? He was on the podcast a few months ago. He was a terrific guest, very sort of jovial, and he talked a lot about his college and how he got started in politics. And I think if memory serves, his first political sort of activity was at the behest of Mark Miles,
Yeah.
working for the Lugar campaign in the early 70s. So you're a
Yeah.
trustee now of Indiana University. What's that mean?
It's a thrill of a lifetime, but it is also an awesome responsibility. It means that I'm there to, in my opinion, and everything I'm saying about being a trustee is just my opinion. I haven't even been to the first board meeting yet. It's next week. And it is an awesome responsibility, and I feel that I'm charged with by Governor Braun to make sure that IU provides the greatest benefit that it can to the state, mainly through how we educate students, and that includes being affordable. I am glad that Governor Braun has initiated a call that all the state universities freeze their tuition. Purdue has done for 14. And in fact, so I support that very strongly, but I want to see tuition reduced. That's my general responsibility, in my opinion.
There's a little bit of, and you can certainly pass on this question, but a little bit of controversy about how the trustees are appointed for Indiana University under the new law that was passed in 2025. I don't think that's a big deal. My master's degree is in medieval history, so I'm a bit of a monarchist. I don't mind if the king has special privileges, but is that, in your view, is the controversy well founded or a bit overblown?
It depends what controversy could you
That
define it
that
better?
sure that the governor chooses the trustees and they took the alumni out of the vote, and I know there's some folks who are upset, even though I think 0.001% of alumni actually vote, they're still upset.
Hey, that's a pretty good math because the last victor of the 790,000 living IU alumni degree holders who are all eligible to vote, only 20,000, which is 2%, voted, and the one who won got 3,800 votes, which is 0.01%. And so that's not democracy, that's a sham. We would never accept an election as legitimate that 1% or 2% of the people vote in. And it obviously is a reflection of what the alumni think about that election. Okay? And now, of course, Mike Braun was elected by the people of the state of Indiana with 1,600,000 votes. And surely among those were two or 300,000 or maybe even more degree holders from Indiana University. So the reason that the governor gets appointments to the IU Board of Trustees is because number one, IU is a state government entity. It was created by the legislature in 1820. Has been received a huge amount of money from the state taxpayers. So it's a state governmental entity, and democracy means that somebody who's elected by the people of the state should be in control of the government. And we got a problem with that, the deep state thinking that a democratically elected president or governor ought not to have any business affecting or influencing what government agencies do. And that is anti-democratic. And alumni have an interest. I am an alumni. My experience at IU is instrumental in my views about IU. So when I speak as a trustee, I'm speaking as an alumni. So they're going to be well represented, and they are. The four appointees by Governor Braun are all IU alums. And but the an election where 1 or 2% of the voters vote is a sham. And it is anti-democratic to say that the governor, elected by 1.6 million of voters in Indiana, it's illegitimate for them to have a role. That's totally anti-democratic.
I have had several IU graduates on the podcast. Jim Morris, who I'm sure you've known for a long or knew for a
Boris.
long time. David Frick, who's the most underrated person in the history of the city of Indianapolis. Everything that great that's happened in the city in the last 50 years was either done by him or as a fruit of something that was done by him. And also folks like Jim Kittle, who I know you've known for decades, Ed
Yep.
Tracy. I don't know if how well you know Mr. Tracy, but he's a very good friend of Jim Kittle's and Tom Coverdale and Landon Turner, and the list goes on. The one Angela Ganote, I should also mention, of course, and Pamela Whitten has been a guest. She was tremendously impressive on the podcast as she is as president of IU. But what makes IU so beautiful and special that every single person I know, even if they haven't been on the podcast, would go back there tomorrow and start all over again?
It was a remarkable journey being at IU. I pledged the fraternities while I was still in high school, and I lived in the fraternity house, Kappa Sig, for all 4 years. And I was, as I've been, was very active in student government and other organizations, and the sports teams were fun to watch. So it is a remarkable university. It's idyllic. People from all over the United States and the world are banging on the doors to try to get into IU. It's become a destination for many people because of what it provides. And that's at the top of my list is to make Indiana University the most excellent university that it can be. I think the people of the state of Indiana deserve that. I think Indiana University can achieve that. It's got two colleges that are already at the very top of the list, the Kelly
Right.
School of Business and the Music School. I'd like to see the other ones be rated higher too.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies. Our guest today is distinguished attorney and Indiana University trustee Jim Bopp. You mentioned being involved in politics in college. I'm going to guess that bug bit you long before you got to IU. What's your first sort of political memory?
The first memory is being on Ohio Boulevard, which is right at the north of where I lived in Terre Haute, and watching the Eisenhower parade come by on that street. And they were, of course, throwing out to anybody that was there. They were throwing out candy and whatever. I have a distinct memory of that. The first time I really did something was in 1964 when I like to say I organized my high school for Barry Goldwater. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration because at that time, Vigo County was 2-1 Democrat. And of course, this was Wiley High School in Terre Haute. And I did get 30 people, though, out of the 1,000 students. I did get 30, okay, to agree to volunteer for Goldwater. So that was my first real putting my toe in the water, and it's been a very intense interest my whole life.
Did you ever get
Uh,
to meet Senator Goldwater?
no, no, I did. He did come to Indiana, and he was in Indianapolis, so we had a rally. And I remember there's a big parking lot. I don't know where, but I did go over to watch him, so that was cool. But no, I never did. But I had been influenced by my dad. But I did a lot of studying. When I was a camp counselor at a Boy Scout camp for 5 years, and I would have a pile of books on political philosophy or economics and all that I would be reading because while my dad's my most respected figure in my life, I don't. I study. Okay, I
Right.
look into these things, and I've done that my whole life.
There's a brand new, and I'm hoping to have the author on the podcast. There's a brand new biography that's being released on William F. Buckley Jr.
Oh, yes. Now I
Now,
have met him.
okay, because I saw him speak in Indianapolis one time. He was, of course, just like you would expect. He was brilliant and witty and engaging. But the National Review and the sort of coming of age of conservatism in the 60s, how much did that influence you not only to learn more, but solidify your beliefs?
It helped. By then, I was convinced that that was a philosophy that I wanted to pursue and that would be the best for the people of the United States. But that's the birth of the conservative movement was Buckley and people that surrounded him and that he worked with. That's where the conservative movement came of age. And it was partially a result of the Barry Goldwater campaign, but it was really bigger than that. It was a whole movement was started. And it took a long time, I guess, now looking back on it, it's not that long, but for it to really have an impact. And from 1964, it was 1980 with
Mm.
Ronald Reagan. So that movement blossomed into electing a president. And of course, it's been the predominant philosophy of the Republican Party for all these years. And I've helped shape that, frankly. I was for 5 different times over 20 years. I was on the National Platform Committee every 4 years up until 2016. And that was my last year. But I was pushing conservative ideas, and many of the ideas that I have championed have really become embraced by the Republican Party and our presidents, like Trump, both his first term and this term, has embraced conservative views.
You mentioned that you got to meet William F. Buckley. What did you say to him? Was it more of a formal meeting or informal?
No, we were sitting in this house drinking. I was drinking Budweiser, and he was drinking some sort of liquor. I don't know. He's much more highfalutin than I am, and
You
so
mean Westchester County in New York is more Tony than
then
Vigo
Vigo
County?
County, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't think they'd let me in Westchester if they knew I was from Vigo County, frankly. So he'd come to give a speech at IU, and the I had helped with the alternative magazine, a conservative magazine that began the year before I got there at IU, and
Mhm.
with R. Emmett Terrell,
Oh yeah. Yep.
which later went national as the American Spectator, still being published. And so that was the connection. He got Buckley to come, and so we sat around in this really old, decrepit house in this family room. There were like 5 of us. And after his speech that evening, it was really a wonderful time.
You mentioned reading political philosophy and you mentioned economic theory. Do you have some favorite philosophers who, I mean, Edmund Burke is often cited as one of the fathers of modern conservatism,
He would
the
be.
British philosopher. Who, others, even including modern day, who you just enjoy reading.
Adam Smith, John Locke, those are people that certainly really influenced me. Some of the ones that don't get as much attention are like Walter Williams or Thomas Sowell. I've read their books. Look, I have hundreds of these, okay? And there's a lot there. And fortunately, I didn't have a mind for medicine, but I fortunately had a mind for, and I don't have a mind really for philosophy or theology or, God forbid, metaphysics. But I do have a mind for politics, litigation, and a mind for war, even though I never practiced war, thankfully, even though I certainly would have. And I think it's interesting. I've also read a lot of military history and military strategy because what I've found is politics, litigation, and war are have all the same tactics and strategies. And having a mind for that, and of course, those tactics and strategies are most well expressed in military history. Okay, and so I had a mind for that, and God has blessed me with being pretty successful in both.
You mentioned a few minutes ago Locke and some of the other philosophers. A lot of conservative thinkers, and I use that term as a compliment, have broken from the 20, let's say 2016 through June 5th, 2025 Republican Party. How do you, if you were in a room with them like you were with UMF Buckley all those years ago, how would you persuade them that Trumpian conservatism is true conservatism? Because the argument so many people make is it's not conservatism, it's a perversion of it.
Well, I don't agree with that at all. I fought for Trump. There was an effort to abort his candidacy even after he had won Indiana and was therefore the presumptive nominee and all that. And I fought that. They wanted to adopt rule changes that would abort his candidacy in that. No, now he has changed my view on something that is important, and that is trade policy. And of course, as I've come to understand it, the problem, which is absolutely a problem, which is unfair trade practices, where we practice free trade and the other countries don't. All right. And so then how do you deal with that? What kind of leverage can you use? We're not going to invade them. We're not going to bomb them. What are you going to do? The weapon that seems to be effective, we'll see for sure, is you treat them the way they're treating you, and they don't like that. And actually, you have leverage when we're buying their products. If we would cut off trade with China, it would collapse their economy. Some of goods would be more expensive for us, okay, but there's a lot of other suppliers, and that would take some adjustments. So we have tremendous leverage over them that we've never exercised, and we let them exploit us terribly, not in legal ways, but also in illegal ways. How they steal our intellectual property and all this has just been horrendous. He's convinced me that if these bad actors, in my opinion, that are barring our products, aren't going to give us a level playing field, then we ought to treat them the way they treat us. And what's going to happen also, then there are other side benefits. And one of them is companies moving their factories and all that to the United States and employing people in the United States rather than citing them in some foreign country. And of course, that's happening enormously. I even know of a company in Indiana that has been selling Chinese medical devices who now want to put a plant in Indiana, okay, because of this. They're very eager to do that. So I even have in my practice, and I don't practice that kind of law, know of the beneficial effects. And it's all about Trump's tariffs. We have to, and Terre Haute suffered from this. We had 20 major factories in Terre Haute. We have one left, literally one, which is Bemis. And what that's done is thinned out the middle class, right? The doctors and lawyers and professors, and they're still doing fine. But it's the middle class that's been thinned out. Those factories had paying jobs that meant that you could raise a family, your wife could stay at home and raise your kids, and you could get them into college, all right? But when they leave, it has a big effect on people. So I think that the trade policy is triggering a lot of companies to reinvest in the United States is really a beneficial thing.
I grew up on the east side of Indianapolis and Irvington, and 90
Yeah.
plus percent of the parents of my friends worked at Ford, Chrysler, Paper
Right.
Art, Ryerson Steel, Naval Avionics, Kroger, International Harvester. Those jobs are gone.
I know it, and it really has major effects on people's lives. And there's no reason for it, in my opinion, other than we let these other countries get away with attacking attacking our products while we let them in freely into the United States.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana based public relations enterprise. Our guest today, famed constitutional attorney. Is that of course, the Star called you a right wing attorney. So I'll say famed right wing attorney as noted
I
by
am,
the.
yeah, I am conservative, and I have represented a lot of conservative organizations and politicians and the Republican Party. I represented the Republican National Committee, which I was on
Right.
for as vice chairman in the United States Supreme Court and won a case for them. I do confess to being conservative, and but that's a bad word in people's lexicon, and I think to a lot of people who work for the Indianapolis Star.
I don't know that right wing was meant to be a term of endearment, more perhaps, but that's something you're definitely used to. Our guest is Jim Bopp. Mr. Bopp, is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most?
Yes, Mitch Daniels. I was general counsel to both of his campaigns. I was very close to him, served as an advisor, became really active in the state Republican Party as a result of him. And I think he's the second best. At this point now, Braun may pass him, okay?
I
Because
bet you're here's
Braun
what
is
I bet
the
you're going to
first.
say he's the second best governor in the history of Indiana after Oliver P. Morton.
That's exactly what I would say. Exactly what I would say. Now,
I introduced him as such one time at a birthday party for P.E. McAllister, and a lot of people were like, "Who's Oliver P. Morton?" I'm
I
like,
know it.
oh my God,
He
pick up a book."
I know it. He, using his own money and help from the Lincoln administration, the Democrats that controlled the legislature when the Civil War started refused to fund our military, our National Guard. It wasn't called National Guard, it was called militia at the
Mhm.
time. And so he used his own personal wealth and help from the Lincoln administration, that he was very close with, to fund our militia for until the election, the off-year
Right.
election in '62, when the Republicans took over the legislature.
He wasn't
But
even elected governor; he was elected senator, and he switched. He
yeah,
switched from going to D.C. because he wanted to fight in Indiana. I guess we could turn this. I wouldn't have a problem making this the Oliver P. Morton Love Fest podcast, but you've mentioned Mitch Daniels, and I want you to continue on that. And let me throw in an extra question. It is asserted, I think somewhat erroneously, but only Mitch, who's come on the podcast several times, could say this definitively. I love Republicans like Mitch Daniels, the Mitch Daniels wing of the party. It's so different than what we have now. As someone who admires, I know you're friends with Mike Pence, you admire
Mhm.
Donald Trump. You just mentioned Mitch Daniels as the Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most. If I made all those assertions to you in a public setting about all these wings of the party, how would you cross-examine me?
Let me just give you my opinion. My opinion is that we're a big tent, and there are shades, but I don't think there's any dramatic differences. And Mitch Daniels, he had all the characteristics that I would want in a governor. He was conservative. He pursued conservative policies, but he was a doer. Okay. And one of the sessions of the General Assembly, he literally had 67 bills that he was pushing. All right. And we had suffered for 16 years with Democrat governors that did nothing. And so there were so many changes that needed to be made in our state government to make it more effective, more efficient, deal with the actual problems that we were facing that the Democrats never touched. And he wanted to be governor in order to do things, not to sashay around and or get a nice title. But then you also have to add Purdue. Okay. Now understand I'm an IU guy, and I've always thought that anybody that would go to Purdue demonstrated a character flaw that needed treatment. But what a outstanding president of a university. And that just shows obviously it's different being governor than president of a university. But the skill set that he had that he applied there And we've already mentioned one of the outstanding things, 14 years without a tuition increase.
My son was
Yeah.
at Purdue for 4 of those years. And so
Yeah.
whenever I see the governor, I'm always very thankful. Your point about doing something, Indiana's history is going to be a whole lot of really good things. And then it's going to be AD, and that's after Daniels, and how much things have changed for Indiana. The same can be said, I believe, of Purdue University. It's a bit, I never would have predicted that role for him. It's not like
Mm-mm.
I'm in his inner circle, but still, it was a bit of a surprise. And some people can just lead, and he's one of them.
Yeah. And I think Braun has many of those characteristics. And remember, I said this is after I maintained Governor Daniels being the number two man, but Braun's only had 100 days, okay? He's exhibiting all the characteristics that I thought Daniels did, and that he's a doer. He left the U.S. Senate, he would have probably been uncontested. Instead, he went into the most expensive primary we've ever had in the history of Indiana with some really solid candidates making a serious run. And because he wanted to do things, you can't
which
do
he's
anything at the Senate other than
which he said on
sashay
the
around.
podcast. Forgive me, sir. He said that on the podcast. He was explicit. He wants to do
Yeah.
to get stuff done.
Right. And so this is a much better, much more fertile field to be able to do that. And he's perfectly prepared to take a leadership role as he has been. And so really try to get serious things done. And I really, from a conservative standpoint, so I
You
really
mentioned
admire that.
Your mentioning of Mitch Daniels took me by surprise, not because of anything you just said, because it's all manifestly true. And quite frankly, I'm about ready to retire the blade from that question because he's the one who seems to get mentioned most often by far.
Yeah.
But he's also famous or infamous, depending on your take, someone's take, for his speech about the truce on social issues, which kind of made it a little bit of a surprise to me that you mentioned him. Is the truce on social issues, or the Republicans constantly being criticized for emphasizing social issues? Do you think that's a fair criticism of us as a party, of us as conservatives?
Not generally, no. I don't think it is fair. You have to understand the context of that he signed every abortion bill that ever came before him or that related to right to life. That he signed all of them. He spoke at the largest banquet in Indiana, annual banquet, and that's in Evansville, Vandenberg County to Life. So he wasn't shy about implementing pro-life policies at all right? And but pe politics is the art of the possible, and people have different views on how that manifests itself, and people have preferences on what they think they can achieve or and want to achieve, and that's just human nature. The basic test for him was, are you signing legislation? Are you saying you're pro-life? And are you demonstrating that? And he did all those things.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little. I want to ask you one question going back just a little bit. You said, or you didn't say, born in Terre Haute. Your law firm has always been in Terre Haute. There was a time period where Terre Haute was the center of the basketball universe in
Yes, it was.
1978, 79. What was it like to be? I'm assuming you were in Terre Haute, so please disabuse me.
Oh, I
During
was.
that time period when Larry Bird was leading Indiana State to the national championship game.
And undefeated. Let's remember that too, because it was a great achievement. I saw Larry Bird play in high school, and I thought, oh my gosh, this guy is going to be fantastic. And of course, I was an IU guy, and then he agreed to go to IU's. There were a couple of weeks,
Right.
and then tragically left, in my opinion, and then ended up at Indiana State. But it was a great privilege for him, for ISU to have him on the team. He proved what a great player he is. He's certainly one of the most outstanding players ever to play the game for sure. And he has that. And because now he was very talented in his shooting and his individual scoring ability and rebounding. But what made him great was how he made all the other players on the team great as well. They were all the other players at ISU were role players. There were four other role players out there, but he maximized that role, okay, that they served on the team. He was able to maximize it by his passing, by his understanding of the game, by his vision and all that. There's a few of those that have been around over the years, and he's right at the top of the list.
The law, what drew you to it from an intellectual standpoint? And how have you been able to, and this is a relatively broad question, which I'm sure you can slice down, is how is it that you've been so successful in some of the most contentious issues in American politics? You're so successful, you're vilified, which I guess is a great thing.
People are known by their friends and known by their enemies, and I'm proud of both. But I don't take it personal. See, I do not think political disagreements mean that you're an evil person. And I really learned that in high school as strongly as I believe in my principles. All right. I was a very successful debater in high school. I was in and when I graduated, I was in the top 10 in the nation in high school debate. And then I debated intercollegiately for IU. And what I learned was that there are reasonable arguments on both sides of an issue because you had to debate both sides. You
Right.
debate positive first, and then you debate negative the very next debate, right? And so I have never taken political disagreements personally and that has so benefited me. It's the right thing in my opinion. But I have a lot of friends that are strongly liberal and who one of the first cases I debated, I argued in the U.S. Supreme Court that it was actually a consolidated case where the Republicans and the conservatives had brought one case and the liberals and the Democrats had brought an attack on the very same campaign finance statute. And so I was the head lawyer for my side, and this guy in Vermont was the head lawyer for the liberals, and we became fast friends. And he had won things that for the liberal cause that were quite remarkable. And I'm still friends with him. This is 20 years ago. I'm really glad about that I don't take it personally and I don't view people that disagree with me as evil at all. They just simply have a different point of view. That's
Was
all.
was law, which was more helpful? Was law more helpful to getting you more prominent in the political world, or was the political world more helpful to getting you some of these significant landmark cases?
It's a symbiotic relationship because I set out starting when I was a sophomore in high school, that I wanted to advance the conservative cause. That was my main thing. All right. So I become a lawyer, and I'm still wanting to build a law firm that would advance the conservative cause. So right away, I was trying to get involved with conservative organizations, some of which I had already become involved in, and use my legal talents to represent them to as not-for-profits to make sure they comply with the IRS, and I soon learned campaign finance laws, but also to advocate for their cause. And I've represented almost every major national conservative organization at one time or another in something or another. And so at the same time, of course, the politics is how we do government. And so that involves elections and politicians and political parties and all that. And readily understood and already understood by the time I became a lawyer that it was really important that we have politicians that reflected these views and political parties that reflected these views. So it was symbiotic. My political activity resulted in me representing the Republican National Committee in the U.S. Supreme Court and winning a case for him.
Let me ask you about that because I read through your bio and I've had to present or defend my ideas and informally, in a lot of cases, in front of people like Andy Jacobs Jr. and Mitch Daniels, Greg Ballard, Mike Pence. The list goes on and on. You're gently arguing your point of view. As a matter of fact, Andy Jacobs Jr., who was a phenomenal man and Hoosier and patriot, the only time we actually got into an argument was over the guilt of Mary Surratt in the Lincoln conspiracy. He thought that she was completely innocent, and I just looked at him and shook my head, and it went south from there. Let's just put it that way. But it's somewhat daunting, especially when you're running up against someone, let's say like Mitch Daniels, who's singularly intelligent, right? You want to make your case the best you can. What was it like the first time you walked into the Supreme Court to argue in front of the 9 justices? And over your career, have you just gotten used to it?
Number one, it's like nothing else. We argued before every circuit in the Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States, and literally hundreds of district courts, and then had 14 cases decided on the merits in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the first time you walk into that, the thing that struck me the most, because you're going to be questioned by the smartest lawyers and judges in the United States, okay? And so you have to be ready for that. But what really surprised me was you have a chambers, and the justices are arrayed in front of you, but not more than 10 feet away, okay, but higher, okay, of course. And there's 200 people behind you, about a third of them lawyers and the rest of the general public. And you're the only one standing in the entire place, and you're all alone because you have a couple of associates next to you, but they can't help you.
Right.
And it is awe-inspiring. And every time I've argued, I've felt that same way, how awe-inspiring this is, and different than anything. Now, look, I've argued before some courts that think they're pretty hotsy-totsy, like the California Supreme Court. I've argued before them, and in regular people courts like the Indiana Supreme Court are made up of just good, very smart Hoosiers they don't put on airs like the California Supreme Court. But I've argued for Texas and Minnesota and just on and on. But there's just nothing like it.
Did you get the last time you did it where you're like, yeah, I've done this before?
No, I understood it was special and a special challenge always.
Did you get asked a question by any of them on any of your appearances you didn't know?
What I would put in that category is Justice Breyer, who in every case would have this really long scenario a story he'd want to say. And as he's saying that story, I'm standing there thinking, what in the world does this have to do with my case? Okay. And then at the end of the story, he would say something like, am I right? And I'm thinking, right about what? I mean, what expressed all these opinions and all this. And so you would have to search for something that you would want to comment on. Okay.
Right.
And this one time it happened, he ended his story by saying, am I right? Okay. Now, I thought he was wrong. You don't just tell a justice of the Supreme Court to like flat out, oh, no, you're wrong. So I did what I had always done. I pulled something out of his story and commented on it. But then he said, am I right? Okay. And I did the same thing. I pulled something else out of the story and said that. And the third time he said, am I right? And I said, no, Your Honor, you're not right, with all due respect. Now, why he cared, whether or not I thought he was right or not, I'm still not sure about. Okay. But that was the most challenging thing I ever had. It was his, and he always had one every time, this long hypothetical that you just stand there and say, what in the world does this have to do with anything?
We should note that last Leaders and Legends podcast guest, David Frick, was at Harvard the same time as Stephen Breyer and knew him, I believe. Oh. I should also say that I want to mention, you mentioned the Indiana Supreme Court. I had the great task and opportunity. And he was absolutely wonderful to interview former Indiana Chief Justice Randy Shepard.
Oh, yeah. I respect him tremendously. I've gotten to know him. Yes.
It's wonderful. And other attorneys, Jim Voiles is a friend of mine. He came on the podcast, federal judge Sarah Evans Barker. And the list goes on. I guess Bob Grand's an attorney. Let's just
Of
throw that
course
out
he
there. Let's
is.
just throw that out there too.
He was managing partner of his law firm, for
That's
goodness
exactly
sake.
right. Toby McClamrock, Murray Clark, they're everywhere. Mitch Daniels
Yeah.
has a law degree. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
What is it about the law that attracts such intellectual powerhouses? Because as much as lawyers are defamed or ridiculed, the list goes on and on. Clearly, the career of law is intellectually challenging and really can bring out some smart people.
It is really intellectually challenging. If you have a mind for it, then you can really plumb its depths. And I've been blessed by, as I've mentioned, just absolutely the top graduates of law schools all over the country as my associates. And that interaction is just tremendous to building your understanding of law. And I just have a mind for it, that's all. And I've gotten these wonderful challenges that I praise God for. So
It's been nearly 25 years. Were you involved in Bush v. Gore?
I was. I did two things in Bush v. Gore. One, on Thursday after the election, I get a call from the Bush lawyers and also the general counsel for the then Governor Bush. I got a call on Thursday, and they were in the office together in the governor's mansion, and they calling me to say, we figure we're going to end up in federal court on this, but we have no idea what federal claim we have. So would you think about that and work on that for us? And at 2:30 in the morning, we sent them a draft complaint, and I pulled my associates together, and one of them, who's now the president of the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund, wonderful lawyer, he was the first one that came in, and in 15 minutes, we came up with the equal protection vote delusion theory. And so we drafted the complaint with that as the centerpiece. And ironically, and this has all been published in law review articles and books and all that, this story. Ironically, when we sent the draft complaint to the Bush lawyers, they sent us an email back and said that under no circumstances are we going to bring the equal protection vote delusion theory. Now, understand that ended up winning 7-2 in the U.S. Supreme Court and was the basis legally for their opinion. The only disagreement was, were they going to allow the recounts to continue? And 5-4, they said no. Okay, it's over.
You think the
Uh,
Supreme Court decided that case correctly?
Oh, yes, definitely. They decided on the theory that I argued. Now, what I did, because they said they weren't going to bring it, is I brought my own case in federal court. We ended up in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta together,
Right.
okay? And Ted Olson argued for Bush, and I argued for these voters. And and then we went to the Supreme Court, and of course, their case got taken because, after all, they're representing the candidate. I understand that, but they decided it based upon my legal theory.
Why were they, forgive me as a non attorney, why were they so adamant in not adopting your?
The best I understood, and by the way, once they got to the Supreme Court, they did argue it somewhat, okay,
Right.
but is they considered it a liberal theory. That this was something, this was a basis for some of the rulings regarding voting and voting rights and all that. And there is a strain of lawyers representing whatever cause that the other side has developed this theory and it's been accepted. And so we should treat it as illegitimate and not argue it ourselves. I've always taken the other point of view, and that is, look, that's the law. I may not like that law, but it is the law. And if
Right.
it benefits us in this particular circumstance, we're foolish not to use it. So that's my best understanding of why.
I remember reading at the time, and I know he just passed, where even Democrat attorneys were saying Gore better have his act together because Ted Olson is as good as it gets.
He is quite an accomplished lawyer, no question about it. I wish it had been more fully embracing of this legal theory so that I wouldn't have had to bring my own case.
Is there a Supreme Court justice in the past or even the present? If you could clerk for any of them, whom would you choose?
Oh, Alito or Thomas under the current things. Justice Harlan, if I 100 years ago. I respect Scalia tremendously. I like Wizard White a lot.
Yeah, appointed by Kennedy. Yeah.
Yeah. There are some of these justices that really think deeply about the law and have special talent in understanding it and thinking about how contested questions should be resolved under the Constitution. Scalia, probably more than anyone, is the one that got the court to adopt textualism as a way of deciding cases. Liberals issued textually based rulings or they argue in dissent. They say these words and what that is about is you need to interpret a contract, a constitution, based upon what the words meant at the time. Okay, because that was the understanding of those words that the people adopted those constitutions based upon that understanding. And if we're going to respect the people, the popular sovereignty is the people that adopt these constitutions or amendments to the Constitution, then that's the only legitimate way, in my opinion, to interpret those words is not based upon our current understanding, but their understanding at the time. And that's being faithful to democracy.
Just from a professional, from a legal standpoint, so not being a father or grandfather or husband, is the decision in Citizens United your greatest accomplishment for democracy?
Yes, it was a really big one for democracy because, well, but there are others that are policy issues that the people should be deciding that were seized by the illegitimately, in my opinion, seized by the judges, like Roe v. Wade is a classic of that. But Citizens United, what it dealt with was whether or not a corporation or a labor union could independently endorse candidates. Now, there was a decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1986 that said no, that they couldn't do that. If you think about the democratic effect of that, rich people have the money. They already have the money. And nobody is stopping them from spending the money. It would be unconstitutional to do that, to spend the money and endorse candidates. What about you and me? People of average means. We don't have the money. So how do we pool our resources in order to match the rich people? We join a group, okay? National Right to Life Committee, one of my long-term clients, is a corporation, right? It's made up of a whole bunch of people of average means that give, I think the average is like $50 contribution. So in other words, looking at this from a democratic standpoint, rich people have the money, they can spend it. But how are people of average means going to participate? They have to be able to join a group and pool their resources and spend that money. And Citizens United has empowered people of average means to pool their resources and support candidates just like the rich people can.
So, me giving $500 to Mike Braun, in your view, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, and we're going to end with the 5 questions here in just a second that we asked everybody. But if I write a check for $500 to Mike Braun, to you, that's considered free speech.
Sure, absolutely. And there's no debate about that. The Supreme Court recognized that from the get-go. And of course, that has resulted in opinions such as I have won in the Supreme Court that there are contribution limits that are too low. but Citizens United was not about giving to candidates. It was about giving to a group to independently advocate their own point of view.
So
And
the point that is often made, it's almost rote at this point, almost, I was going to say Pavlovian. There's too much money in politics, you would
yeah,
say.
there's not enough money in politics because by any measure, when you measure, because you spend money to communicate to the voters, right? And are we spending enough money? Ask the average person who their U.S. senator is, or who their governor is, or what political party a particular governor adheres to. And it's woefully inadequate. The majority of people in Indiana cannot name either of the United States senators at all, and probably don't even know that they're Republican.
And it's not
So
a
that
Hoosier,
means
it's not a Hoosier problem either. It's
no, it's ubiquitous. And that means there's not enough information being conveyed to the voters in order for them to know very basic things about their leaders and their political leaders.
Was the overturning of Roe v. Wade a surprise to you? It actually happened as opposed to legally it should never have been decided that way in 1973 regardless.
I was always hopeful. I'm an optimistic guy, but I'm also governed by the motto that you only lose when you give up. All right. And so I'm very persistent. And I have given up on a few things, but I'm very persistent. All right. And so I'm rarely defeated. But this was the longest project I ever had. I started it in 1978 when I became general counsel for National Right to Life. And my job was to design a legal strategy and then implement that strategy on behalf of National Right to Life and the pro-life movement to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I did that. And you never know when, because another thing you learned about the Supreme Court, it's their agenda. It's not yours, it's theirs. And you can't make them do anything. They'll decide what cases they take, what issues they'll consider, how they'll decide those issues. And it's all their agenda. And so your job, though, is to present cases, all right? To present them and then argue the best you can on how they should decide it. So I never knew in any case that the Supreme Court took up, they could have reconsidered and overturned Roe v. Wade in any of the cases that they took. And they took several dozen over that since 1973 to adopt. And so I never knew what it would be, but I was very persistent in making sure that they're presented cases, and then we adequately argue that when it becomes that when they become a willing court to do that, that they'll have all the opportunity to do that. But I was persistent because even though we lost, and Roe v. Wade was the central right to abortion was reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in '92, etc.
Was that the the
We
Kennedy decision? Was the
Yes,
one?
that was Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and there was a joint opinion with Kennedy and O'Connor and Souter that was the lead opinion in that case. And they explicitly agreed to reconsider Roe v. Wade. We thought we had the prospect of 7 votes to do that, and we lost 5-4. Very disappointing, but we don't give up. And Citizens United was a result of an instance where I refused to give up because the very provision that was struck down in Citizens United had been upheld in 2003 in the McConnell decision. And 7 years later, because in the interim, I won 2 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court that laid the groundwork for Citizens United. And and people thought I was crazy when I brought the second case. A judge in Citizens United, when I argued in the district court, literally, this was a conservative judge, a district court judge, he literally laughed at my argument about that this was not precluded by McConnell, that the court should consider this.
Did you
I
get
mean, he
his
literally laughed.
vote?
No, I lost three to nothing in the district court. And of course, I got the last laugh, right?
Yeah, being an attorney, especially in your level with what you deal with, is a little bit like the Roman army of antiquity. We'll lose, but we're never going to stop, and we're never going to quit, and we're never going to give up. That to me is as succinct a summary of Roman military history as I can give on a tiny little podcast like this. Let me ask you one more question very quickly. What's your favorite legal movie?
There isn't any because I sit there and critique it. No, that's not right. No, that you can't do that
So you don't watch
because
Law and Order?
never did, never would.
You don't even like The Verdict? It's such a brilliant
Never
movie.
did, never would, because I just sit there and critique it because they get it all the law wrong. So,
You're like my historians who come on the podcast are like, I'm a professor of medieval history and I simply can't watch Braveheart because it's just so completely and totally wrong. We
right,
have
just give me a war flick. Give me a war flick and I'm good.
we are we've reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. And of
Oh
course, Mr.
boy,
Bopp doesn't get these ahead of time because he doesn't give the people he asks questions their questions ahead of time. Are you ready, counselor?
I'm ready. Do I have to give a one-word answer?
No, sir.
All righty.
You're a lawyer.
I know. I would never say something in a sentence that could be said in a paragraph.
What was your first job?
I was 15 years old and I was at a Boy Scout camp. I'd applied for the staff, but they didn't hire me. But I went as a camper. I'm sitting there in a tree roll, and up comes the camp director saying, "Would you like to join the staff?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yes, yes. What's the job?" Cook's helper. So I got up at 5:30 and I scrubbed pans, and I was paid $5 a week and plus room and board.
What was your first concert?
I'm not a big concert guy, and I remember going to, was it Sting with my wife because she thought he was cool. That's the only concert I can even remember going to. Now, at IU, I don't think you'd call them concerts, but there was certainly bands.
Sure.
The Dawn Five we would have at our fraternity, and they were fabulous.
Greg Ballard's first concert was at IU. Sly and the Family Stone.
Oh boy.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Oh my. If you have the mind for it, in other words, you're like I think I do, it would be Sun Tzu, The Art of War. You need to think strategically when you're in many of the things you're involved with in life, and certainly as a lawyer or a politician, you need to understand that. And it's one of my favorite books. It taught me one thing that I've used, oh my gosh, to my benefit, which is to remain formless. Two armies are approaching each other. You hide behind the hill and you take certain action to make their army array itself. They're guarding this valley. They're setting up on this hill, whatever. So even a really big army, much bigger than yours, you can defeat if you make them array for battle because there's always weaknesses. All right. And you then attack the weaknesses. Lawyers are suckers for this. Lawyers think that they have an advantage if they talk first. Okay. No, because then they make an argument, and I can sit there and say, "Oh, I see this weakness right
Mhm.
here." And that's how I'm going to direct my argument to defeat theirs by this particular weaknesses. So I will always try to make other lawyer talk first.
Sound like my friend Bob Gran, my friend Tom John. I know they both love that book.
Yeah.
Uh, Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
The resurrection. Uh,
Last, go ahead.
yeah, that
The
says
rest.
it all, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's a popular response, a very popular response. Number 5, last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record just to chat, whom would you choose?
I've met and talked to Justice Thomas before he was on the Supreme Court. I would want to meet with and talk to him.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. We are also a federally certified veteran-owned small business. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister.
Great
Our guest,
man.
the greatest. And as my daughter says, the cutest. Our guest today, the formidable Jim Bopp. Thank you so much on behalf of Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, free thinkers, everyone who wants to participate in our democracy, for your hard work, your unwillingness to give up, and for your appearance today on the podcast. I'm very honored.
You're very kind, and I've enjoyed our friendship that we've had for many years. And you've tried to persuade me on a few things too, and I think you won. You did.
I did. But can we just end it there so that I don't blow it? You've always been very generous with your intellect, even when you disagreed with me, and I'm grateful.
Hey, we all can learn from each other.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.